Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Friday Ramblings. I am your host, the Bardic one, and we are still feeling the green because while St. Patrick's Day may officially be over, the fun has just begun. That's right, because we have a lot more March to go through, and we got a little Irish tint to our ramblings. That's right, it's a little bit of St. Patrick's Day hangover as we discuss Marvel's Merry Mutants and how 3 of them from the same family tree are truly Irish citizens to be proud of, or at least to note. One of them you may not be so much proud of. We are talking about the Cassidy family. We're going to start first and foremost with the first one introduced, and that is Shaun Cassidy, known as Banshee. I know, in the original myths, Banshees were traditionally female, but he's an Irish mutant with the power to scream in all kinds of ways. Officially, superhuman hearing and vocal cords that can project sonic energy as concussive force or energy lances to shatter or disintegrate matter, create sonar pulses, or to cause unconsciousness, trances, or disorientation in others, flight, which pretty much covers anything you can do with sound, including a few comic book superhero level things Shaun Cassidy could do. Now, we're not going to go into super big breakdowns on all of these characters because we are doing a trio here, as I said, and I don't want to necessarily take too long. I know everybody's having a fun extended holiday, but more importantly, as I said, I do want to focus just on a quick intro to the characters and how they connect to their Irish heritage. So as I said, Shaun Cassidy's powers were based off the Banshees of classic mythology and Celtic legend. Banshee himself would lead a interesting life as he is both a trained detective with Interpol, as well as having been a unwilling villain due to Factor 3 basically placing a little device on his head that looked like part of his costume's headpiece that would cause him to go kablooey if he did not play along with their schemes. Fortunately, the X-Men very quickly managed to find a way to disarm this blackmailing bomb, and Banshee would, while initially choosing to go back on his own and deal with the time he had spent being an unwilling criminal, he would eventually become a long-serving ally of the X-Men, especially during the first major team shakeup that started with Giant Size X-Men number 1. Perhaps his greatest contributions to the X-Men mythos, though, was not as an active field member, but as a mentor to the later generation of X-Men shown in the spin-off comic Generation X, where upon realizing that over time the X-Men, with the different crises they were going through, including the fatal legacy virus, as well as many personal issues, had lost sight of one of their goals to train the next generation of mutants in good use of their powers, Sean took it upon himself to open up a new school. Although it was technically an old school, but it was run by Emma Frost, who had been a villain up to this point in time. They ended up co-running the school since once she returned from her seeming death. She was dead to the world at large, but she was in a coma. It's kind of a long-winded thing. We'll deal more with Emma later. But the point is that Sean inspired Emma to reopen her old school where she taught mutants to be her own future lackeys into a legitimate academy for next generation of mutants. It was in this role that Banshee really came into his own, proving to be a great mentor and instructor before the academy eventually shut down due to its own problems. He would later nobly sacrifice himself at a time when his powers were almost non-existent to try to prevent a mid-air collision between two aircraft, eventually being resurrected, because comic books, people are eventually resurrected, though in all fair credit, he did stay good for a few number of years. He did stay dead for a good few number of years. Yeah, we all know what I'm saying. However, before his demise, Banshee did have several run-ins with his cousin, Thomas, known as Black Tom Cassidy. Now, Black Tom Cassidy, besides being a long-running ally of the Juggernaut, Professor Xavier's stepbrother, also had a few solo adventures of his own. And Black Tom's powers are that he can release thermokinetic energy blasts through wooden material. Due to a leg injury from many years ago, he used a shillelagh both as a channeling for his powers and as a walking aid. Eventually, Black Tom Cassidy would run afoul of Cable and X-Force and would be nearly killed. Cable intended to kill him, but Black Tom managed to survive. And using advanced medical techniques that were kind of experimental, he had parts of his body that were too injured to function anymore replaced with crazy viral wood fibers. Very fictional concept here. That, among other things, allowed him to no longer need his shillelagh because his body had wood contained in it. He channeled his blasts through those wood portions of his body. In a series of plots over different arcs, Black Tom, the viral wood fibers would begin consuming Black Tom's body, messing with his mind and pushing him into homicidal bouts of insanity. Eventually, he is cured and is restored to regular human form for a few years, but would encounter, as many people were during this time period in comic book, in X-Men comics, a secondary mutation that turned his body into complete plant matter. He would go thoroughly insane, do stuff that was much more evil than in the past, where he was typically more of a, robber, occasional blackmailer. Stuff that, while highly illegal, did show he had a certain line of violence that he preferred not to cross. In his full plant form, he had no limits. and as such would unfortunately do things that would cause some schisms and shattering of his partnership with Juggernaut, and himself lead to, upon regaining his original human form and his sanity, place great regret and guilt over his actions. But we did mention there's a third person here, and that would be the lovely Teresa Cassidy, also known as Siren. Now, Siren is the daughter of Banshee. However, for most of her life, he did not know she existed. See, way back before any of the characters debuted as superpowered people, Tom and Sean would compete for the affections of the same woman. She would choose Sean. They would become happily married. However, while he was off doing an assignment with Interpol as an official law enforcement agent, Maeve would both give birth to Teresa and pass on. Die, expire, whatever your preferred nomenclature is. Tom himself would take up out of his still... Let me phrase this right. Due to the fact that he was still in love with Maeve, the woman who created the love triangle and some bad feelings between the cousins, Black Tom would take it upon himself to raise Teresa, initially just intending it to be until Sean returned from his long-term mission. However, when he returned and found out his wife was dead, he, having, as we said before, a lot of ill will with his cousin, who was doing a lawbreaker routines at this point, just not as bad as he would later on. The two would get into a fight at the gravesite of Maeve Cassidy, and Black Tom would choose, out of anger and spite, not to tell Sean about his daughter. Black Tom would raise Teresa, and when her own powers emerged that were a duplicate of her father's, she would, for a couple of cases, capers, missions, assist Black Tom before recognizing that her Uncle Tom was not a good guy and she did not want to follow in his footsteps. As a young adult, she would break away from Tom, meet her father, and decide to become a hero in her own right, although she never joined any of core X-Men team, instead spending time with their spin-off team X-Force, led by Cable, as well as the later private detective variants of X-Factor, led by Jamie Madrox, the Multiple Man. It was during this time with X-Factor that Banshee died protecting the airplanes from crashing together, and she would initially refuse to believe her father was dead, eventually coming to accept it, and this, along with some other personal issues that we're not going to deal with because it gets really deep into the X-Factor mythology and stuff going on. I really don't want to bog you guys down with this since we're not doing discussion on the X-Factor series itself, and it does take a while to set all this up, but basically she went through some personal trauma shortly after finally coming to terms with and accepting her father's death, which would lead her to lead the team for a while and do some hedonistic actions over a period of weeks, including sleeping with Deadpool, who had spent years harboring a crush / romantic interest in Siren. In fact, it was an early meeting with her and her insistence that she could never get involved with a villain that set Deadpool on his initial path to heroism, as weird and awkward and psychotic as his path of heroism often is. But she eventually got herself back together, got back into active duty with X Factor, leading up to an adventure where, in order to protect herself and her friends, she merged with the Morrigan, which is a Celtic entity. Basically, let me make sure I'm getting my notes here right. She's a Celtic goddess who is herself tied into the Banshees of Legend. Also of interesting note at this time, during the point where Banshee was dead, Teresa herself took up the Banshee codename in honor of her father. After bonding with the Morrigan, Siren would disappear from X-Men books for many years before eventually returning in the modern Krakoa era for their X Factor book, in which they picked up this plot thread and she was separated from the Morrigan. Confused yet? Well, don't worry, folks, because we got a little bit more Irish flavor for you, because like any good old Irish family, especially ones in comic books where, hey, we can have a lot of fun with a lot of fictional concepts, Cassidys own an ancient castle, Cassidy Keep, which is, let me get my directions here, located in County Mayo on Ireland's west coast. It was originally built in 1185 AD and has been the home of his descendants, except for a brief period where Oliver Cromwell drove them from residence. Oliver Cromwell is a real-world historical figure, a very interesting figure in Great Britain / United Kingdom history. Feel free to read up on him on your own time. Now, in current modern times, Sean Cassidy is considered the legal owner of Cassidy Keep, and it was there that Siren went on her get her head straight, do drunken sexual shenanigans with Deadpool period. Which, hey, with Banshee dead, the castle legally became hers. Although I think after his eventual resurrection, he probably took legal control. We haven't seen the keep since his full return to life. But still, the keep did show up in a story arc of Generation X, where Banshee and a few of the Gen X kids visited the castle. And it should also be noted, besides being, as I said, a really cool looking ancient castle located in Ireland itself, it is home to a population of leprechauns who get along with Sean, who, as a landlord that's not around all the time, basically lets the leprechauns have the run of the castle by and large, as long as they do not destroy it. Good deal for everybody. So there you go, folks. I mean, you look at this. We got two family members who have powers and codenames related to the Banshees of Ancient Legend, one of the most iconic and well-recognized figures of Irish mythology to the world at large. An ancient castle full of leprechauns, and a wayward cousin who carries his own shillelagh and has occasionally been made of plant matter, so he didn't need the shillelagh. I don't want to go and throw this in. We're going to jump back to Black Tom for a second. In the modern era, where the vast majority of the mutant population is living on the island of Krakoa and is trying to form their own peaceful nation, Black Tom, who, despite being by and large human now, still has some sort of connection to plant life, besides the whole channeling bioblast thing, is one of the reformed villains living on Krakoa and using his powers to serve as part of the first wave of security. Being able to essentially talk with plant matter, he serves as a kind of scout across the whole island, because anybody who touches the plant matter of Krakoa, he knows they're there. This kind of broad-ranging perspective also makes him a little oddball to talk to at times, but at least his somewhat kookiness is harmless now, as opposed to the homicidal insanity he had for a few years there. Unfortunately, his buddy Kane Marco, not being a mutant but being mystically powered, and I don't think he was ever going to make peace with his stepbrother Charles. They've tried a couple times, but it never lasted. Is not welcome on the island, so we don't get super cool fun times with rehabilitated Kane and Black Tom chilling out. Which is sad. I'd kind of like to see that story, because they were an interesting pair. Black Tom being your sneaky, strategic type of criminal, and Juggernaut being, well, the Juggernaut, the ultimate walking wrecking ball. They made a fun pair as a criminal team. Come to think of it, we haven't even seen much interaction between Black Tom and Sean, or Black Tom and Teresa. Come on, folks, let's pick up some of these story threads. Let's get all the Cassidys together for a party. Still, there is your breakdown of 3 mutants who have, in the case of Banshee and Blink and You Miss It cameos from Siren, have shown up in some of the various live-action X-Men movies that have been made over the years. Banshee in particular was part of X-Men First Class, and in the initial couple movies we did see Siren as one of the teenage students at the mansion. So, hey, Irish and proud, good representation. What else can you ask for? Well, I know what I can ask for, and that's for you to subscribe, click that notification bell, leave some comments, and tell everybody about the Friday Ramblings, because, hey, I got a huge amount of archive videos for you folks. So even when March is over and our little going green salute theme has passed, we are still going to have plenty for you to watch if you never saw the old stuff, or rewatch if you enjoyed it and want to see it again. We got one more video in our March themed month, so come on back in 7 and we're going to break it down. For now, I'm going to wish you all a good night.